Mike, thanks so much for joining me today. Excited to get into your SMU story. Someone who's seen the SMU network pay off in a multitude of ways, and your ability to give back now, sitting on boards. But for those who don't know you, and before we get into your story, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, Mike Romo, grew up in San Antonio, came to SMU on the Hilltop in 1988. Was heading to either Austin or College Station, and then a torn ACL had another plan for me. So, it's one of those life moments that feels devastating at the time, and it's the silver lining playbook. And came here, played football, got my finance degree in the Cox School of Business, and I've just built a life and a network through SMU that I'm forever grateful for.
So you kind of have that story that we read about, the Texas high school athlete with big dreams of going to the big universities. And even at that time, right, 1988, SMU is you know somewhat in that heyday, right? You're probably thinking of them as an elite program along with the A&Ms in Texas. Tell us about high school, how you viewed the Texas school landscape. Obviously, you mentioned some other schools in the injury, but kind of where did SMU sit in kind of the top recruits mindset at that time?
Yeah, I mean, look, they were coming out of the death penalty, so they were a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. And I grew up in San Antonio. All my family went to UT, so I was being fed burnt orange Kool-Aid from when I had diapers. And I think for any kid that grows up playing sports, the ability or opportunity to be the starting quarterback at UT is an amazing. And I was right there. A&M actually offered me a full ride before my senior year, and I turned them down. And I said, "Look, I just want to play my senior year, see how it goes." I was getting recruited by BYU and Stanford and UT, and A&M was really aggressive. I mean,
Hmm.
they actually won the conference 3 out of the 4 years I was there. The wrecking crew, they were amazing. We were 6-0, number 1 in San Antonio, and just playing in a non-district game, tore my ACL. Didn't really know what it was at the
Right.
time, and went and had surgery. It was the Jack Henry, the Spurs doctor at the time. He just scoped it. He didn't reconstruct it. Back then it was kind of a split house. They didn't always just necessarily reconstruct your knee. And so SMU offered me a full ride. Rice offered me a full ride. I had appointments to all the academies, and
Hmm.
so I came to SMU. I met Forrest Gregg, SMU legend. Best player for Lombardi ever coached. And,
Hmm.
when he just walked in, I just felt his presence and his commitment to bringing the program back. So, it kind of turned into who knows what this is going to, what it's going to be, but for me, it was an opportunity. SMU was out for a year. I was out for a year. It gave me a chance to rehab. It gave me a chance to kind of learn a new system under
Hmm.
Tom Rossley, who eventually became the head coach. And then ended up starting for 3 years and on running around on a torn ACL, which seems kind of crazy that I would do that, and then ultimately tore the other knee. And but as you and I were talking about before, I was you always have to plan for the next chapter, and so I was very focused on my grades. I took a lot of pride in making good grades. I was academic all conference. I graduated in 4 years from the Cox School of Business. Had a fifth year of my scholarship, and dabbled in some TV radio classes that I thought were interesting. There are a lot of good broadcasters that come out of the Dallas market,
Hmm.
but ultimately decided to go and just take my business degree and kind of get to work.
Love it. And it sounds like you referenced some of the schools recruiting you. You must have done pretty well academically in high school. What did you know about SMU outside of football that maybe let you pick? I mean, you mentioned Rice and some of these other, academy schools that are also put you in a great network, a great launching pad into a career. What did you know about SMU, and maybe what did you learn on the hilltop that made that decision solidify?
I didn't, admittedly, I didn't know a lot about it. I think, for a lot of people, their first exposure to SMU was the Pony Express. And I
Hmm.
remember watching Eric Dickerson, and then, going from there and just, setting records in the NFL. I mean, he was an amazing guy, and I've met him since, and he's even better in person. He's just so down to earth and such an amazing, representative of the school. So I didn't know a lot about it, but as I spent time with Coach Greg, and I saw he brought in some really talented coaches with him, and so there was this big commitment to bringing SMU back, and I felt this, it was a great opportunity. I was one of the first 15 to get a scholarship, and through that time period, I saw the power of the network, the alums that came back, the enthusiasm and the interest of bringing SMU back into the fold, and as a competitive person, I want to play in the Southwest Conference. At that time, there were 8 schools in Texas, and you want to play against all these people that you competed against in high school. So, it just kind of fit for where I was at that point in my life, and I really appreciated the smaller school, the smaller classes, and just everything that it represented versus what the big school. You get lost, and it's easy to get lost in the big on the big public
Absolutely.
universities.
So take us back a little bit if you can, right? We think of this insane momentum SMU has. We're in the ACC. We played in a college football playoff game. What was it like post death penalty, still in the Southwest Conference, and then also as a student athlete that maybe people don't understand? Like you mentioned, you were focused on your academics. You got into the Cox Business School. What was life like for you in that time period? Maybe what was the hilltop like for those who weren't around?
It was probably polar opposite of how it is today. In the NIL era, there was nobody got anything. No one could buy you a cup of coffee because for fear of, sanctions and
Right.
ramifications. So we were living in, bizarro opposite world of how it is today. Which was fine. I mean, that was the intent of intercollegiate athletics at the time. But it was a complete rebuild in every sense of the word. We had 15 scholarships the first year, then we got 25. So we roll out with 40 scholarships. And the emphasis from the school was we want student athletes. You had to get 1,000 on your SAT.
Mm,
That directs you to recruit a different type of person, athlete. You're not getting, necessarily the, Gatorade All American team because, it's a different pool that you're recruiting. And at the time, President Pai had come from Duke. He was trying to put his fingerprints of that and just really trying to reestablish and, fix the brand. And so there was so much emphasis and so much protection around we truthfully weren't put into a position to compete on the same level
mm,
as everybody else, which made it challenging. But look, by the by my senior year, I mean, we had flashes of greatness. We recruited great players, guys that have tremendous grit, guys that have gone on to be extremely successful, um, in their personal and professional lives. And the first year we went up to Arkansas, last game of the year, we're beating them 24-23 in the fourth quarter. And then they just ran Barry Foster down our throat, and we had no depth.
yeah,
So 100, so it was it's kind of a series of highs and lows,
yeah.
and but by our senior year, we were, right there competing close to getting a bowl game, which would have been phenomenal. And we ended up 5-6, but it's just some, there's nothing like being in the trenches and going to war with people that will create stories and relationships for a lifetime. And I think the alums appreciated what we did and what we went through to help bring the program back. So fast forward, now we're in the ACC. We're back in a great power conference. We're back where we belong. And all of this momentum that I'm seeing over the last 2-3 years being making the playoffs, it's put SMU back into the place where it's always belonged. And I think now we're in a path that you watch TCU what they've done and playing for the national championship and playing Final Four in basketball. That should have been us.
Right.
We didn't get into the conference. There was a lot of shuffling. We missed on some opportunities, but here we are. Now it's time to take advantage of it.
So what one last question before we kind of jump into your career was the SMU quarterback post death penalties like a college celebrity, or were you just kind of viewed as another student, or was there still some perks of you were recognized, or was the a fandom completely kind of gone?
Yeah, I mean, not I mean, truthfully, not really, because, at the time, because, my wife asked me that same question sometimes, but, it comes down to wins and losses. And so our offense was really good. We were top 5 in the nation,
Wow,
but nobody cares about that. I think I was second team all conference, but behind Andre Ware, who won the Heisman,
not
and that
bad.
Southwest Conference newcomer of the year. We offense set a lot of records, 25, 30 records at the time, but nobody cares if you don't win, including me. Like I would throw all of that away to just have a winning record. My goal was to make a bowl, plain and simple.
Yeah.
We got close, it didn't happen. So, what I liked about that era is there was such an emphasis of just kind of bringing athletes in and sort of normalizing that.
Mhm.
And so that's sort of kind of my makeup. And I think a lot of the people that came on were that same way. And, kind of no nonsense people, hardworking, gritty people.
Totally. And that's where, yeah, I think you talk about a lot of these trials and tribulations just from high school to college that are incredible character builders, kind of really proved probably to yourself the kind of fabric you had to succeed. And I think that'll tell a good story into your career arc. But first, kind of tell me a little bit, and kind of for the audience out there, why are student athletes kind of such great hires, great investments for firms? And I know something you're still passionate about helping to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, the demands on your schedule, the ability to prioritize and balance, the ability to coexist on a team, to be accountable to other people, to be, hold yourself accountable. Getting up at 6 in the morning and going to the weight room. There's a level of commitment that, in order to be successful, you have to have that moxie that others just don't have or didn't commit to or didn't have the opportunity to. And you can see it, when you meet people that they've been on teams, they understand what it takes, they understand that the highs and lows, bouncing back from a bad loss and coming down from a good victory. How do you get your head right and perform for the guy to your right and the guy to your left. And um, building teams are hard. I think that's why we love watching sports. You watch the Final Four, or the basketball tournament. You see these guys gel. You see what Indiana did last year. You see, Michigan's weird. How they had 5 starters that transferred, but they were able to come together and create some team chemistry, and it's just fun to watch. I mean, most people, Americans, love to watch that competitive spirit and see how people thrive under pressure. Um, and I think the people that have that makeup will generally be successful in life.
Totally. And so to you, back to you, from the ages of 18 to 23, right? Your life could have gone so many different directions. An injury ultimately leads you to SMU. You're at a time at SMU where they're focusing on academics. They're not maybe catering to the athletes, or, sending as many athletes to the NFL maybe that they had historically or would do in the future. So a lot of these factors come into your kind of decision tree. Tell us a little bit about how you went to ultimately decided a first career path or first job post graduation at SMU?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of deja vu where, at the time, but after my sophomore year, I did start getting some inquiries from agents and, you know, being a, kind of mid late round draft pick.
Mhm.
And at that time, it was early about the passing schemes and, quarterbacks that could read defenses. You look at a guy like Purdy or even Drew Brees, not big um, in stature, but just knew the game, understood the game. And so, when then I tore my other ACL, which ironically was a little bit of at the time that the athletes didn't get priority registration. So I had a finance class that ran into practice,
Mm.
and I actually went to practice. I was late. I didn't tape. I skipped taping so because I wanted to be there for the team. Roll my ankle, shredded my ankle, taped up my ankle that game like a ski boot, and then went out against Baylor and cut and just tore my other ACL, which
Oh,
was just a sequence of sort of unfortunate circumstances. But going back to your question of were we treated any differently? Like, yeah, I mean, we were just Joe students.
Mhm.
And, not that that was the sole reason, but that just, again, to your point, it just changed what was happening. But at that point, I was, very focused on getting my degree,
Mhm.
working on the next chapter if and when, that was sort of presented to me. So, and, I went down to the career center, typed up my own resume, sent it to, it was like, who's hiring? Had a couple of, sales jobs offers,
Mhm.
but I wanted to just get something that was fundamentally sound. And, Bank One was, they just recreated their credit training program, and I wanted to just go and sit and learn, spreadsheets and, how companies operate, profit loss, the fundamentals. And that was really good training for me.
I love it. And that's kind of how you approached the early days of your career, right? Is you dedicated so much time to football, school, you kind of wanted to re-immerse yourself into kind of learning the bigger picture of business, right? So it went from Bank One and then into management consulting, right?
Yeah. So then I moved over, met some people from Accenture. And what I really learned there was just the communication with the C-suite and everything that Accenture was doing, from business process improvement to IT integration. It was really kind of the early days. It was EDS, IBM, Accenture that were really, doing a lot of the business process outsourcing, systems integration, SAP. The early, long before AI was ever even
Right.
considered. But it was really about improvement. But when you go and talk to a CFO or a CEO, they don't really care what the code is. It's really like, how is it going to improve my return on equity? How is it going to improve my performance? I mean, what are the key metrics that you're actually trying to help me solve? And I was around a lot of really talented people that understood that, could present that way, and it just sort of trained me to, you never push a product. If you have to go in and understand what this company
Mm,
needs, and do you have it? And there are a lot of times when you might not have it, and but you create relationships, and you if you're lucky, you land some business. If not, you get some referrals, and you just kind of bob and weave, and kind of take what's available.
yeah, and I like how you've, as we talked before, kind of the way you've approached a very methodical way of thinking about where you fit in the business landscape, right? You subconsciously probably know you're a great leader, you're a team player from your days in sports, right? And then you took the time to build up some skill sets, whether in banking, management consulting, and you had this one quote earlier of saying that you knew you were a solution provider, right? You figure out what a company needs or a person needs, but you've always stayed well connected. So you're about 10 years into your career, banking, management consulting. Tell us a little bit more how you found out this solution provider kind of skill set, network skill set, and then how that then pivoted to what we know you as of today as a more in the real estate space, and kind of how that career then evolved. And I think there's some good SMU ties into that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. No, it's so many. I mean, basically, I think every job I've ever had an SMU connection to it, and so it just speaks to the nature of the alums and how people look out for each other and want to help. Generally, sincerely want to help each other. So I was at EDS. And, at the time they were flying high, but then they had some issues where they were having accounting irregularities. And a big part of it was taking balance sheet, buying um, team and infrastructures, outsourcing.
Hmm.
But when their stock price plummeted from 75 to 9, you had no capital to actually go effectuate deals.
Hmm.
And so we were all kind of stuck. I mean, it was kind of a dark time. We had 75 salespeople in the Dallas region alone, and they took that to 9 in 1 week. So I'm watching all these people funnel through, and coincidentally, I was the one person that had signed up a deal. So Tom Dundon, who's a famous SMU alum, he was starting, or he had established Drive, his auto finance business, and SMU, or I'm sorry, EDS had a remittance processing thing. So through my relationship with Tom, we did this deal.
Wow.
I was one of the survivors at EDS at the time, but it was clear that they were going to have some issues for a couple of years. So I'm sitting in my office, I'm reading the Dallas Morning News, and I read, this is 2002. So, and I see Roy Bailey, he's the legendary SMU guy that, came up with the pony ears.
Mhm.
And there was this article about how he had started a consulting business with Mayor Giuliani right after 9/11. Rudy is an incredible rock star, as popular, maybe more popular than the Pope at the time for
Mhm.
his leadership. And I kind of just at that time just sort of had that mindset of if you don't try, you don't know. So I called up Roy. I'm like, Roy, I don't know if you remember me. And he was just like, couldn't have been more gracious. He's like, yeah, let's go to lunch. I want to hear what you've been doing. And they were doing a lot of threat and vulnerability assessment, a lot of post 9/11,
Mhm.
using technology as a form of security.
Mm.
And so my background just matched up really well with them. And so as I studied what they were doing and kind of figured what my role could look like there. He's like, I think you could be a good fit. Flew up to New York, met everybody, met the mayor, met all of the
Wow.
commissioners, and I called my wife one day and I said, I think we're moving to New York. And and yeah, we went up there in 2003 and had an incredible run. And so one of the groups that we started doing work with was the state of Qatar, really to help them. At the time, it was the wealthiest country in the world, given all their LNG and
Mhm.
oil production, and they had hired us to help them with their security, on the pipelines, and at the same time, they created their investment arm that was very focused and interested in getting into U.S. real estate, specifically office. So this is 2006. It's not office as we know it
Mhm.
today, which
Mhm.
is and they said, "Hey, if you can help us find an off-market deal, we would love that." Well, that's hard to do, but when you're in New York and you're in the flow of things that are happening, I had a buddy at Fortress that did a $9 billion deal with Harry Macklowe, um, and he was looking for some equity partners. So anyway, long story short, I got QIA to look at that deal, and then that's what sort of transformed me to get into the real estate private equity business, and with a focus on raising capital and sort of bringing those people, the LPs and GPs together.
Love it. And then so you I'm sure you kinda answered this here, but, all these skills that you've built leading up to this point, risk taking, your network, sales, when did you kinda know, whether it was with Giuliani Partners or kind of connecting groups together, that you were gonna do well at this is something you wanted to maybe now put a flag in the ground as a career or a specialty?
Yeah, I think you got to do things that you're sort of naturally good at or enjoy doing. And so I've always had this sort of weird trait of always liking to put people together,
Yeah.
and just trying to think, it's like, oh, this person would benefit from knowing this person, and it's networking at its most basic definition. But when you do it in the realm of business activities, and then if you're putting bigger pieces together and there's more sort of revenue generation, all the better. And so when I found that there was this convergence of you know, institutional fund managers and global investors that are, looking to invest in US real estate, I just sort of found that as to be an interesting niche, and just kind of took it from there. And so when I went to go we worked with a fund of funds for a little bit at Hawkeye, which was an SMU connection as well,
Mhm.
and then ultimately got recruited back to go to New York, which we left in '08 when it was just kind of a bleak time, and I'm like, well, I don't need to live in New York. I mean,
Mhm.
people were losing. I had a friend at J.P. Morgan. He was an analyst. He basically he said he was written up in The Big Short. Every Wall Street bank is insolvent. I'm like, that's like one of the craziest things I've ever heard. He's like, no, Mike, every bank could go down.
Right.
And so there it was. So anyway, we moved to Austin for a few years, rode that out, and then had an opportunity to go back to New York. I had felt like I had some unfinished business, and went and did that for 11 years, and raised 4 funds, and, between there and what I've done at ACORE, raised a little over $9 billion, and have
Wow.
had a lot of fun doing it.
Let's as we get into a little bit more on ACORE, and I didn't prep you for this, but as you got to speaking, you talk about so many of the SMU connectivity between your career. How do you think SMU succeeds so well in building out this network and allowing for it to be a resource for professionals such as yourselves who are great connectors, and knowing that you have founders of companies, family offices, kind of like, can you touch on maybe some some thought around that you've experienced and why that might be so powerful?
Yeah, I think SMU just generally recruits or attracts well-rounded people. There are just certain schools. I've gone through the college process with my two older kids, and you look at the Ivies, you look at these, you know, predominantly academic schools that don't have sports, and that's what there's a little more of a singular focus here. I just think there's a lot more balance,
Mm,
and even my oldest daughter now, she's working for Nuveen in Chicago, and she's like, "It doesn't matter where you went to school, not that where you went to school." She's like, "I know people from Michigan, I know people from Indiana and Illinois. They all love their schools because of the sports."
mhm,
And so, if you can strike the balance of having good sports, good academics, good environment, and then you layer in Dallas and Texas and all of the great economic benefits of being in a state like this, and business friendly environment.
mhm,
It's just, sky's the limit. And I think the smaller classrooms, the ability to get to know your classmates,
right,
work in projects together, you really establish these great relationships, not dissimilar to what you experience on a football team or a basketball team or a
right.
soccer team. You're working on things together. You get to know each other. There's those relationships, and the classes aren't that big, so you stay in touch and you build these relationships very naturally, and there's this ecosystem of people that want to help each other, and it's awesome. I remember when I went to New York one time, and the guy who was running MSD, was an SMU grad. I just cold emailed him like, "I'm from SMU," and he's like, "Yeah, copies of the system. Like, come in, let's have coffee." And
That's
I
awesome.
mean, I think that's the power of the SMU network.
Yeah, you're spot on. I think one thing I've learned to appreciate is also your story of your daughter saying, everyone loves their Indiana school. Those schools are so regional. SMU, my experience there, I'm sure yours too. You have friends who are from New York, Miami, California, so that when you're in your professional career and someone like you who travels, every hub and city you go to, there's probably a business leader with an SMU tie there that you can connect with.
Yeah, with that, I mean, that is the honest truth. So my job is pretty heavy on the travel side and has been for 15 years, and I'd say 8, 9 times out of 10, if I want to see somebody in LA or DC or Chicago, and then my connection with ACORE, I was having dinner with a guy, one of the founders of ACORE, and his daughter went to SMU. We're having dinner in Sydney, and that's what sort of prompted this conversation. He said, "Oh, my daughter's looking to, get in the entertainment." When she wanted an
Mm,
introduction to NBC, and I'm like, "Oh, I know some people at NBC."
wow.
And he called me a couple weeks later, and he said, "Hey, I've seen what you built at Torchlight. Would you want to consider joining us?" And that's what kicked it off.
Wild. Well, let's wrap up here learning a little bit more about your role at ACORE, what you guys are doing there, and then how we can again kind of expand that within the SMU network. Those who are in the real estate world, how can they find you? When should they connect with you? And kind of be get plugged in with Mike Romo.
Yeah, no, I'm always happy to network, and I'm a big believer in giving back. So I'm on LinkedIn. We have 5 offices. We manage about roughly 16, $17 billion. We just actually completed a transaction where we sold the majority of the company to a Japanese insurance company called Tokyo Marine. And then coincidentally, Berkshire Hathaway bought a piece of Tokyo Marine. Yeah, there's just a convergence of capital and
Right.
how what's happening. So we have 5 offices. I started in New York. We have Miami. We have Dallas. We have San Francisco. And we have LA. And so our we're singularly focused on commercial real estate lending. So we're lending to big institutional groups, the Blackstones, the KKRs, the Carlyles, but we're focused on debt. So we do everything from, kind of a 50% LTV to a 90% LTV. So that's our specialty. We've done, we have 500 borrowers, so we're everywhere, but no one really knows who we are. We're
Yeah.
we're kind of the we're the fuel that puts gas in the tank and lets these communities grow. But I split my time, so I'm based in Dallas. I have a sophomore in high school, but we have a place in New York, so we'll go up there during the summertime and really kind of keep those connections live because we lived up there for about 16 years. So if you're in New York, you can find me there in the summer. I'm in Dallas, but I'm all over. I'm traveling to most U.S. cities, but I raise capital globally. So we have investors from Korea, we have investors in Israel, we have investors in Canada. So we manage a good amount of capital, and the thing I love about being back in Dallas is there are a lot of borrowers. So people want some capital. We've got a great origination team that's constantly looking to build and create those networks. So that's a great opportunity to reach out to me and the team here. That's we're heavily investing in Texas,
Yeah.
for the obvious reasons.
And so is there a certain size people should think about when reaching out? And then on the other side, as you guys look to grow this Dallas presence, or those alumni and students interested in kind of getting into this space, what are some tips on getting into the real estate debt side?
Look, I think you just need to like similar to what I do. You got to roll up your sleeves. You got to learn the model. What are the variables that make these investments work? You got to think about it from a credit perspective. You got everything that goes into making these projects successful. We're doing transitional lending. Are these markets trending the right way? What kind of risk do you have on the sponsor? When things get competitive, people start giving up, on credit. You got to be careful. But it's really just understanding the risks and the mitigations of what makes real estate work or not. And I think that the more you understand that, you do become a solution provider, whether you're in a JV relationship, if you're talking to an LP or a GP, then you understand where everyone needs to fit within that schematic to make it successful. So,
I love it. Well, those listening, please reach out to Mike. We'll provide your contact info. We're excited to have you in Dallas. Everyone who sees you back on the boulevard better throw you a ball or at least dap you up. But thanks for spending time with us today. We're excited to have you as a part of our community and lucky to have you as an alumni. Mike, thank you again.
Mitch, I enjoyed it, man. Anytime, let me know.
Absolutely. Talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Thank you to our sponsors, Sewell Buick GMC, Agility Holdings Group, Probity Advisors, Sound of a Rose, Hilltop Property Tax, Security National Bank of Texas, Boyd, Shackelford, Barnett and Dixon, Bigham Agency, Life After Ball, SMU Cox School of Business, and Mignon Steakhouse.